Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here with us today. We're so excited to hear about your experiences in what we have called the Apathy to Empathy curriculum project. We do have a video explaining a bit about the background of the project, but we're very excited to have with us three of the profs that participated in the project today. We're very excited about hearing from your perspective and the perspective of some of your students. So we were really privileged to be able to interview and hear from them about their experiences. So I'm not going to introduce you. I would love it if we can start with just a round of introductions. Tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe some of your work, what you do, and the course that was involved in this interdisciplinary collaboration, and maybe a little bit about like what level it was whether it was upper undergrad, for example, and what kind of students are in the course, because I know that some of your courses draw people from different disciplines. That would be great. So if you can get started, I'm just going to go with the order on my screen. And if you would like to go started, then Darko and then Eva.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Anne Spice. I taught a class that is a new class, so it was a pilot for the class as well. My own work is with Indigenous communities that are resisting resource extraction and specifically pipeline projects. And so that's been the work of my dissertation and ongoing work in the Department of Geography. So the class that I have built and that was part of the participation in this project was entitled Colonial Infrastructures in North America. And it's a 500 level class. So I had students who were mostly from within geography and environmental studies department, although I had some drawn from other departments. And most of the students came into the class because they really felt a need and had a strong desire to learn more about Indigenous issues. And most of them came in without having any experience with that so far at the university. And so the content of the class was really focused on the spatial and material realities of settler colonialism, on the different forms of invasion onto Indigenous territories that are happening through infrastructure projects. So we talked about highways and dams and railways and pipelines. But the culminating project of the semester was an infrastructure expose where students had a chance to dig into a particular infrastructure project and to make connections to colonial processes. And so some of the students who did that chose water infrastructures. And so it was interesting to see how that kind of came together and also how they were able to draw on some of the other students in the project to learn more about how those infrastructures were functioning as a tool of colonialism. So yeah, I heard a lot of good feedback from students when it comes to their participation in the project, but that's the class that they were participating through. So it wasn't specifically a class that was focused on water, but there were a number of students who did pick up the sort of connections with water infrastructures or the impacts of other kinds of infrastructure on water systems. So yeah, thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. And that gives us a really comprehensive look at the types of projects students were involved in. Darko, please.
I'm Darko Joksimovic. I'm an associate professor in the civil engineering department. And my research interests deal with urban water systems. And the Apathy to Empathy project was incorporated into a final year civil engineering course called Water Supply Engineering, where we explore everything from source to tap as it relates to primarily urban water systems and primarily in the developing world. And in the past, these are the students taking the course are in environmental streams, so they have at that point declared their interest in the environmental aspects of civil engineering. And what we did this year with the course is rather than focusing on developing a broader understanding of water issues around the world, we kind of went back to our backyard and focused on water issues that Indigenous communities are experiencing in Ontario primarily, with some obviously appreciation of what happens across Canada. So the project was involved investigating boil water advisories in a specific community in Ontario. We started with a list of, I believe, 34 communities that were listed at the time that the course began. A couple have been delisted since, but unfortunately, none of the ones that the students were dealing with. And the project was really hoping to expose the students to the reasons and the ways in which the long-term boil water advisories are managed in Canada in Indigenous communities. And I think we've achieved that over the course of the project, with additional benefit of hearing from other disciplines that I'll talk about later.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Darko. And Eva.
Hi, thank you. My name is Eva Jewell. I'm an assistant professor in the Sociology department, and I'm also the research director at Yellowhead Institute, which is a First Nation-led think tank here in the Faculty of Arts at X University. And the course that I taught was Sociology 540, which was a special topics in Indigenous feminisms. So our course was very interested in engaging in this project because a lot of the ways that Indigenous feminisms, particularly from my own community, I'm from Chippewa Thames First Nation, which is also in a boil water advisory right now. The way that we conceptualize feminisms, there are roles that deal with water. And so we were really interested in looking at how gender roles, how gender sexualities are impacted by settler colonialism, but also how they emerge from our own place-based worldviews. And so we read a lot of literature that looked at conceptualizations of femininity in different Indigenous perspectives and worldviews. And I made sure to ensure that students read about a lot of the philosophies around water and water carriers, water protectors, and so on, which are of course, feminized roles in our communities. So for this particular project, we were interested in thinking through the actual name of the project, which was Apathy to Empathy. So we studied a theory called felt theory, which comes from Diane Millian, who is an Tanana Athabascan scholar. And she writes about and theorizes about how knowledge is not necessarily, simply or only propositional knowledge that is logically produced. There's actually knowledge also in the body as well. And so we were interested in thinking through a felt analysis on what does apathy and empathy mean in terms of a water crisis. And so in applying felt theory, students did what was called a sentiment analysis, where they would, based on the work that we had done throughout the critical literature we had read on Indigenous feminist perspectives, would go into read comment sections in news stories about the water crisis and do sentiment analyses and think about and think through some of the theoretical underpinnings that Diane Millian talked about in felt theory. So essentially exploring and looking at with a critical lens in the mind to Indigenous feminist literature, what is happening in the Canadian public when they're looking through these imaginary, using sociopolitical imaginaries, how they're viewing and talking about the water crisis. So students collected a lot of different data from different sources, comment sections and news media reports that were covering the water crisis and looking at the sentiment of the Canadian public, which are of course looking at the apathy of Canadians or the hostility of Canadians, and wondering and thinking through what does it mean to get to a place of empathy that the project talked about in the title.
That's really great. I love, we've got 3 completely different courses focused on very different aspects of, the water crisis more generally. And it was interesting the way the courses came together. We were working with a collaborator from Curve Lake First Nation who does a lot of work on the ground, Gary Pritchard. We met with Elder Dorothy Taylor, who gave all of the students in the project a water teaching and a way of understanding the importance of water at least in the way that her community at Curve Lake appreciated it. And then, when the students came together, they got all of these diverse perspectives. And I wonder, from your perspectives, how do you think the involvement in this curriculum project impacted the student learning in your class? And then, maybe even your own experience as faculty members thinking about the way you were teaching your content. And maybe we'll go in the same order. So I'll start with you, Anne.
Sure. Well, I think it was definitely a benefit to students to see a cross-discipline perspective and really understand more than not only the spatial issues that we're bringing up in what's cast as a geography class, but some of the moral issues, the issues around the sort of like discussion and how that's circulating. A lot of them were really interested in the civil and engineering aspect and how a kind of solutions base could be made. Because in my class, we brought up a lot of the deep historical issues, right? We were talking about the roots of colonialism, colonial use of space, sort of how this all comes up in issues around how we conceptualize property and ownership, and then the theft of Indigenous territories. So that all can be very heavy when it comes to constructing what we think of as the sort of main issues that we're dealing with in terms of what these water infrastructures are and what's going wrong with them. And so I think that having these other perspectives opened up some more spaces of possibility for thinking our way to solutions for some of the issues that people are facing. And I think that that's really a helpful thing for the students to understand those different perspectives and understand that there's different ways into this problem. It's a complex sort of multifaceted issue. And I think that especially having the perspectives of students from all the different classes, one of the main takeaways for students was that this is not just an Indigenous issue, that this isn't something that is, sort of, doesn't have its origins in Indigenous people, but in these structures and systems that are causing these forms of dispossession. And so I think that it wasn't necessarily something that we had to sort of hammer them with. It was coming from all of these different perspectives, and that really was generated from the students' engagement with the material and their engagement with each other in the forum. So I thought that was a really important takeaway for students, and one that I think happened in a sort of stronger and deeper way than it would have had I just presented that on my own.
That's so great. And Darko, your students, typically would be looking at the very straightforward proposition of what it is to clean and remediate water, but that was complicated quite a bit here.
Yes, and I think this learning through a collaborative project, such as the pilot that we just went through, is actually necessary. We do need to take our professionals outside of their comfort zone. And when they're as engineers, we're typically front and center in solving multitude of problems through engineering, but the solutions are not engineering solutions. They require appreciation and incorporating all these other issues that are particularly in an issue such as safe water. That we need to understand, beyond what we're taught in our undergraduate or even graduate school, right? At the same time, I think it's hearing kind of firsthand from fellow students in other disciplines is more impactful than just reading about these multidisciplinary issues. We hear about it often, but we fail to appreciate it unless you hear it firsthand from someone who's kind of passionately speaking about a particular issue that is non-engineering, but that it definitely impacts how a solution is to be developed. These activities, they teach and reinforce the multitude of issues that engineers are faced in the professional practice, and aids them in developing better, lasting, and more effective solutions beyond the technological realm that we're very much focused on in our education.
Yeah, I love that the engineering students were learning about felt theory. I thought that was so cool. And you know, for you, Eva, I wonder on the other side, your students are learning about felt theory. What's the benefit of hearing from these students in other classes?
Yeah, I think, you know, as sociologists, a lot of times we're tasked with understanding social systems, human systems, and relationality. And sometimes it can feel overwhelming, especially if we're not, you know, trained in ways where the practical solution, like in engineering, you know, a discipline might be able to be skilled to practically fix the, you know, the water crisis. So working with, or you know, chemistry students who are looking at source water and their ethics and moral responsibilities around chemical production and its impact on the environment. And the same with geographies and colonial infrastructures. So as sociologists, you know, we're thinking about the relationality, we're thinking about the structures, the social structures and the institutions that have created and made this crisis what it is through settler colonialism and ongoing oppression. So being paired with students of other disciplines who are becoming skilled with how to address those issues, I think was a really complementary arrangement, I guess, because the students were compelled to share, you know, the like Darko is alluding to, you know, the thought around the emergence of these structures and how they oppress. So being paired with these really practical disciplines, I think was really generative and created a space of hope. I think students, when we were debriefing about it, students were saying, I felt hopeful. I felt hopeful that, you know, that other students from different disciplines are actually learning about this, and they felt inspired to continue to have cross-disciplinary discussions and engagement about different issues, even just, you know, there's this one, but of course about the multitude of issues that we face today in our world. So I think it was a really, really generative process and something that I am hopeful to engage with again. I think it was a really, really, as Darko said, learning about these things with your peers, alongside your peers from different disciplines was incredibly impactful.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I'm wondering now if we can flip the lens just a little bit and look at your own experiences as faculty members. It's not often or always that we have the opportunity to participate with other colleagues in a project. And I'm just wondering, you know, what kind of impact or what kind of insights that brought for you in terms of your own practice as faculty members. Maybe we'll start with Anne again and go to Darko and Eva.
Well, I'm already an anthropologist in a geography department, so I already feel like my life is fairly interdisciplinary from the start. So it definitely is, to a certain extent, well within my comfort zone to be talking to faculty in other departments. I think for me, I have. And I heard this from students as well, but I think it's probably more my anxiety than theirs. Sometimes the technical aspects I just can't understand. I feel like I need somebody to hold my hand and walk me through it. And getting sort of like pieces of this and realizing that we're creating these artificial blocks to our understanding that are built around the disciplines that we're in some ways trapped in. And there's no need to do that. I'm fully capable of understanding some of the, at least at a broad level, the civil engineering issues that are at play here, or the chemical issues that are at play here, despite my lack of scientific training. And so I think just recognizing that those barriers are barriers that we've constructed artificially, and they're also creating barriers to us actually finding solutions and working together outside of these academic spaces. Because of course, the the disciplines that we carry with us, and these spaces don't exist in the real world. We're not stopping when we reach the sort of edge of what accounts as geography, and then saying, oh, that's now for sociology to take up. We have to be doing this interdisciplinary work anyway. And I think when it comes to this project, Indigenous people have always been asked to do all of it, to figure out the solutions and to be, learn how to be experts in all of these different ways in order to figure out how to, gain access to water for their communities. And so I think it's about time we took up the work in the academy where people have access to resources and training, and to start that work a lot earlier with the students we're working with. So I think there's possibilities for future collaboration as a faculty member. I think that's really exciting. And for me, it's helped me kind of break down some of my own sort of disciplinary boundaries and sense of what's possible when it comes to my own scientific understanding of the issues at hand.
It's great, thank you. Darko.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the siloed way of teaching, even though we have been kind of advocating against it and wanting to develop a more system-wide approach to understanding a multitude of issues, we still teach our students, particularly undergraduate students, in a very siloed way. And that's what projects like this allow us to kind of open up to kind of take down those barriers and then present new challenges. And what Anne mentioned is, speaking in deeply technical language that, one sometimes gets the feel that its intention is to confuse the audience, is something that we have to completely eliminate and, keep it for technical discussions. But when dealing with a multidisciplinary problem, everything needs to be discussed on kind of a common, so that we can develop common understanding. And that's very difficult if you've been trained to think in this siloed way and use this technical terminology and so forth. I think in terms of the role that educational institutions can play, I think continuing integration of multidisciplinarity into engineering curriculum and make efforts to engage on this particular issue, the Indigenous communities, and create applied projects, kind of learning through doing, is something that could be very, I think, mutually beneficial. Students working on such projects could be engaged in, raising awareness of the issues, something that students in my course have particularly identified as being very poor amongst their generation, never mind the profession. Acting as advocates and kind of building the capacity to deal with these issues, not just by the communities themselves, but kind of creating the capacity in the general population, not just Indigenous communities, and as well as all the way to exploring the acceptance of technological solutions, which is quite often assumed, but usually not verified, and with the kind of disastrous results that we've had through these investments that take place, but that are really not sustainable. So again, mutual benefit, closer collaboration, and definitely collaboration amongst the disciplines at the university.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Darko. Eva, please.
This was a new course for me, the Indigenous Feminisms course. So it was my first delivery. And I was already kind of thinking through how I'm going to, of course, if, as an educator, if this is the first time you're delivering a course, you're kind of thinking through what your approach might be, your pedagogy, the way that you're going to structure evaluation and so on. So it was a really welcome introduction to this type of process, to be doing one with the course that I was just developing. And I think as an educator, it really, I think it really enhanced the experience for students, because a lot of times when I'm teaching, first of all, students are learning, when they're learning about Indigenous issues, I get a lot of feedback from students saying that they didn't know anything about this. and are surprised that, you know, I can speak about it with such fluency, I guess you can say, because there's a real two-tiered system in this country. It's the one that Indigenous peoples experience, and then there's the one that Canadians more broadly experience. And that's just a really elementary, like, I mean, in the most simplest terms, but particularly when we're talking about Indian Act and First Nations communities. And so this process of kind of integrating disciplinary perspectives on a particular topic was useful for me as well, to think through how students in other disciplines might consider the topics that, you know, I live daily, right? So a boil water advisory is something I live in daily. And so thinking through and feeling heartened by the fact that chemistry students, you know, geographers and engineering students, in addition to my own students who I advocate to consistently in my work. I mean, that's the job that I have, is to advocate for, you know, for the issues that, you know, Indigenous peoples face daily. It was really, I gotta say, to speak along the same lines of my students, it was very inspiring. It was and hopeful. It gave me hope, I think, as an educator, and thoughtful to how these types of arrangements, educational collaborations, can happen for many different types of issues. And so I think I'll stop there for that question.
I almost feel like we don't need to do the other questions at this point, because we've really touched, I think, on the key stuff.
Yeah, kind of jumped the gun with the curriculum and educational institutions.
Well, you know what though? I mean, to that point, we are all of us working at an institution we are currently calling X University, because of the impact of the namesake of the university, Egerton Ryerson, on the residential school system and so much more. I wonder if any of you want to share maybe some last thoughts about, you know, there's a tension, I guess, sometimes between the work that we do in the academy and what's happening outside of these institutions, and what the role is of educational institutions in working towards solutions to these kinds of, you know, really fundamental problems that are at the heart of the country that we live in. So I don't know, do you have any thoughts about, you know, the role that you see education and universities playing in you know, in creating that hope and moving students forward in a way that can be productive for our future?
Well,
I need to think. Someone else go first.
well, I think if I look at our university, you know, what do we pride ourselves in? City building, zones. You know, this is and this didn't, you know, fall out of the sky. This was in the strategic plan of the university to pursue these kinds of activities, right? So I don't see a reason why, you know, pursuing greater integration of Indigenous issues in the curriculum and making that one of the mandates of the university. And I have to admit, I haven't read the latest strategic plan in full detail, but you know, we can see how universities can deliver on a strategy once the strategy is developed and embraced by the whole community, that it can be impactful. So I think there needs to be a push from the top, if you will, with embracing from the bottom to engage into this kind of multidisciplinary activity and make us, you know, more of a social member of the community, than what we currently are, or than we are in certain aspects of our existence.
Yeah, if I can follow up on that, I do some work on critically engaging Canada's performance in reconciliation. The document we use are the 94 calls to action. I'm very critical of reconciliation, even though I do a lot of work on it, because it's the measure by which Canada purports to want to repair a relationship that was once supposedly a good one with Indigenous peoples. but they are, you know, Canada more broadly are not empowering Canadian citizens to actually take up this work in meaningful ways, which is something that we argue quite a bit. And it's more or less Canadian or Indigenous peoples reconciling with a settler colonial system, you know, that continues to enact violence on us daily. And so I think it's projects like these that expose Canadians, you know, the up and coming Canadian public and professionals to the issues that, you know, their parents aren't aware of, or the generations before them. And I'm speaking publicly because obviously there's people populating these systems that continue to oppress us, but I'm talking about a greater public consciousness. And I think, you know, when I think about institutional responsibility to ending the systems that continue to harm, this is one step in that type of endeavor. I have lots of, you know, different disparate thoughts that are going on in my head right now, but I will say that I think that it's collaborations like these that I don't know if engineering students would have been exposed to, you know, Indigenous issues. And Gary Pritchard, the fellow who we had worked with in the project, had talked about how engineers come into his community and work in certain ways that are indicative of the system that they are educated in. And so it's projects like these and Darko's involvement in the course and so on with his students that hopefully will remedy that type of, you know, colonial dominating thinking that a lot of Canadians have, which showed up in the content of the course that, and the sentiment analysis that my students had done as well, in this kind of, you know, just general Canadian racist attitudes and anti-Indigenous sentiment. So I think that, you know, educational institutes definitely have a responsibility in that regard to actually taking very seriously what it means to move in a way that remedies begins to remedy the system, if not dissolve it entirely.
I think that the feeling I get as an Indigenous faculty member, and the feeling I've also heard expressed by Indigenous students, is that the approach of the university, the strategies that are coming from the top down in the university they feel like attempts to mitigate risk. We feel like we are threats and being treated as such, even in strategies that are meant to, you know, appease Indigenous students or deal with conflicts or tension because of the university's participation in past wrongs. And I think that feeling is hard to shake when you're inside the university, that a lot of even what we see happening now with the renaming feels like a PR strategy and not like a sort of meaningful engagement and collaboration. And so, you know, working from this end and in our role as educators and researchers to really think about how we use this position that we have, and you know, how we have these conversations in our classrooms about what we can do, what we can actually do in the world, because we're in such a position to do so much, and we still feel like bounded by you know, by our lack of understanding in these other disciplines, or by the scale of the issues that Indigenous communities are facing. And so I think it's really important to have this collaboration be happening not only amongst faculty, but with the students themselves, because I think, yeah, as others have said here, a lot of our students are not being exposed at all to Indigenous histories. They're not even exposed to Indigenous people. You know, some of my students talked about how this was the first time they'd ever spoken to somebody who lived on a reservation. And so I think those conversations are so important. There's so much work to be done to not only sort of educate as a kind of like, you know, here are the things you need to know about kind of thing with students, but also to help them practice being in better relationship with Indigenous people, and to provide spaces for that to happen in a way that's supported. And so I think that project is so important for the work that we're doing, and it makes a whole bunch of other things much more possible when it comes to actually working together collaboratively to solve some of these issues and to address the forms of harm that Indigenous communities are facing.
I can just add to that, that's Anne elaborated quite nicely what I meant by embracing these strategic goals. It's not just a box checking exercise, but what gives me hope is when I see the feedback that I received from the students, how genuine they seem in first being shocked by some of the things that they've learned, and then enthusiastic about being the advocates and doing something about the issues that they've learned about. And this doesn't come from a strategic statement somewhere on the website. This comes from within, and to develop that, we need more projects like this, right? Because the human experience is best understood through these personal contacts that students have as part of the collaborative project.
Yeah, it's so well said. We think about, policies and strategies and all those kinds of things, and they're important. You have to have them. Institutions need to be able to do them. And they open up spaces like this for us to be able to collaborate together to maybe do things in a better way than that kind of checkbox approach that you were talking about. So I just want to thank all of you so much for your time today. I don't know, Sam, if you want to have the last word here.
No, just to say thank you so much for all of your work and for being here with us today to reflect on this experience. Thank you again.